Hello, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to run through my thoughts on the new Stephen West mystery sockalong this year called the Colour Popportunities. We are currently on Clue 2, so there will be some spoilers of Clue 2 today if you don't want to see that. And I'm going to show you part of Clue 2 when I'm going through what I thought about Clue 1 initially, so just a warning there. So I'm going to show you now, so if you don't want to see, maybe don't watch this video until you've got on to Clue 2. So first of all, I'm going to show you what I've got on for Clue 1. And, well, of course, there's a bit of Clue 2 on there as well. So initially, Clue 1 includes this band here, which sort of joins in the round to go around your sort of ankle, which I was relatively pleased with. When I first saw it, I thought, oh dear, it's going to be a bit complicated. But actually, it wasn't as hard as I thought. When you actually get into it, there's simple increases and decreases and some eyelets, which is nice and easy. And I really like these welts down this side. If you haven't done welts before, they're not half as hard as what you think. So first of all, I did a completely different cast-on method to what Stephen did. He used a sort of provisional cast on method where you're just using a different yarn on your first row so that you can unpick that yarn, and then once you get to the end of your strip and you're coming to join them together, you then unpick that, pick up stitches, and then you're using the I-cord to bind them together. But I thought to start with, I don't really like unpicking provisional cast-ons, so I'll do the Judy's Magic cast-on, and I've got a tutorial for that which I've used before, but the actual tutorial shows you how to join it in the round, but you don't need to join it in the round, which makes it a little bit easier. You're just basically casting on with 2 needles and 2 sort of rows of stitches so that you can knit on one, and then when you come to join it together to make a tube, you've already got those stitches cast on. So I found that much easier to do, so I will leave a link to that in the description bar down below if you want to find that. When I was doing the welts, my tip was to pick up the stitch exactly how Stephen did in the tutorial video, because I started when I was joining the welt together on that last row of the welt. It was a little bit fiddly when I was trying to pick up the stitch at the same time as sort of knitting them together. So I picked them up with my right hand needle, put it onto my left, and then stitch them together. To do exactly what Stephen says for that one, because I found it easier than doing what was intuitive to my brain. The tube itself I thought was pretty easy to knit. The thing that I was a bit unhappy with was how my I-cord came out at the end. Maybe it's because I'm quite a tight knitter, but I had a sort of gap in the last stitch there that you can see. I'm hoping that a bit of blocking will sort that out. Does anybody else have that issue? So apart from that, I think the rest of the first Clue 1 was fine. I chose the 3rd size because the ankle of my leg is about 10 inches, and if the tension's right, it should be 8.5, with that bit of 1.5 inches negative ease. It helps it stay nice and snug to your leg. So I was happy with that, but I was a bit worried because my leg gets decidedly larger the higher up it gets. So I was hoping that this was going to stay around the ankle, which I think it is, judging from Clue 2. So what I did at the beginning of Clue 2 is when I was picking up the stitches, Stephen goes through it really well, how many stitches you're supposed to pick up in each sort of section of Clue 1. But I actually added 4 more stitches so that I got a little bit extra room around this cuff, because this is quite a long cuff compared to what I normally do, and that extra 4 stitches helped a lot, I think. I've tried it on and it fits really well. I found that previously with my Stephen West sock from last year, I found that I got it to fit really well around this top bit, that when I actually got down to where the heel flap had sort of finished, I could have done with picking less stitches and going down a size. The leg of the sock was quite long, and I could do with doing the different size on the leg to the foot. So if you are a wider legged person like me, you might want to go down to the next size down for the foot bit when it comes to it. We'll have to see what the construction method is like though. That'll be interesting. So the cuff seemed really nice and simple to me. Once you picked up those stitches, it was a standard sort of cuff on there. The only thing that I did differently on the cuff was when I did the cast off, I did a different cast off method to what it says in the pattern, Stephen used the Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy bind off, and I don't like that unless I'm doing it for a shawl or something, because it's got quite a sort of frillier edge, and I like this sort of cast off method better. So for this method I used the sort of ribbed bind off technique that makes a stretchy rib, but it leaves a nice sort of neat edge on the edge of the fabric there. And basically all you're doing is you knit or purl 2 stitches, and then those 2 stitches you do whatever you did on the last stitch to join those together. So either knit 2 through the back loop or purl 2 together. So you'd be doing knit 2 and then you'd knit those 2 stitches through the back loop, and then you do a purl one, and that meant that you'd purl those 2 stitches together, so you're casting them off slowly. So you're basically using a bit more yarn across the top of that edge so it becomes really nice and stretchy. So that's what I did. So now I'm on to the next section, which means I'm going to do the heel flap, which is very exciting. There are 2 options for Clue 2, to do a brioche one, or there's a normal garter stitch. I'm going to do my brioche one, and I'll show you a few clips of me running through what I'm doing, and then once I get to the end I'll give you a bit of feedback on what I think on the end of Clue 2 and how I'm getting on. So the first part of the heel flap, I'm just picking up stitches all the way along this section here. Stephen seems to go through this really well, so I will get on with that. I'm going to use the same technique as Stephen does for doing the make one increase, just doing the sort of backwards A cast on. So I'm now doing the brioche section. You can do a garter stitch bit instead if you wanted to, but I think actually because I've watched the video through already, it goes through things very step by step. So if you're going to start doing brioche, this is a really good time to do it, because there's no increases or decreases in this brioche section. So I definitely recommend having a go if you haven't done it before. So I'm going to go ahead and do a section of brioche, and then I'll show you what it looks like before I go on to the next section. So I've done 2 further repeats of the pattern repeat, and I am loving how this looks. It's weird brioche. I always think that to start with you can't really see it properly, and then it sort of pops when you've done a bit more. But you can see how squishy it looks already. I've never done a brioche heel flap before, but it seems a sort of a pretty standard sort of heel flap shape. So I've now only got 1 repeat to go, and you can see that squish. Look at that. Isn't that lovely? So I've now finished the brioche section. I think it feels a little bit on the short side, so I'm a bit concerned that that might not be long enough here. But obviously I'm going to trust in Stephen's pattern and see how it comes out in the end. And hopefully it'll fit all right when it's finished. His heel flap looks exactly the same as mine, obviously at different colours. So I think I've done it right. And I've got 16 of these big fat main colour stitches, including the pickup row here. So that's what he said you had to do. So the next bit is the heel turn, which I always love a heel turn. So I'm excited to do that. Let's get on with that then. So I finished the heel turn. I love doing heel turns, they're so much fun. I've got the stitch count to 20 stitches, exactly how Stephen said in the pattern, and I'm really pleased I've managed to finish at least the first sock up to the end of clue 2. So my thoughts are that obviously I thought that this might be a bit short. This is the size that I've chosen, which coordinates with the size that I did for this section. So we'll see how that fits round my heel. It could be because it's brioche, it might be a lot stretchier than regular slip stitches I normally do for heel flaps, so we'll see about that. The only thing that I did make bigger was the amount of stitches I picked up around the cuff, so that'll be interesting. The only other thing that I noticed in Stephen's tutorials, even though they're absolutely amazing that he goes through every little step, there are some sections where his needles are slightly off to the edge of the camera and you can't see exactly what he's doing, which is a little bit annoying. And I know myself it's so difficult to get things in shot while you're actually working on your knitting, because you can't watch the actual camera screen all the time while you're knitting because it's really difficult to see through there. But that is slightly annoying if you're just trying to follow along and you're a beginner knitter. So my final thoughts are that I still really enjoy doing the mystery sock-alongs, even though I've knitted so many socks, and to be honest it's actually quite nice to do something a little bit different and challenging with a sock when you've done lots of plain sort of sock knitting, so that's fun. I will keep doing the mystery knit-alongs because he does so many interesting designs. If you actually break it down, a lot of the stuff he does is very, very simple. It's only brioche that's a little bit on the more complicated side. It's just that when he puts things together, it's perhaps not the way you would expect where to pick up stitches or whatever. So it then makes it a little bit more harder to understand because it's an unusual technique compared to normal. But because Stephen does all these little videos to help you along, it's really easy to follow. You can double check yourself if you think you've read it correctly, and then you just want to check to make sure it's right, so that is very, very handy. So compared to Stephen's mystery shawl-alongs, I find that they're a lot easier to follow along with these sock-alongs, because obviously you've got much smaller items to start with, and when he's broken them down, each bit is normally quite easy to do at least one sock for each clue for 1 week. I did find that clue 1 took a lot more time than clue 2, I think, as I've only managed to do 1.5 of these leg sections. It's only 1 day since section 2's come out and I've already managed to knit the heel and the cuff for section 2 on 1 sock, so I'll definitely be able to catch up with the second sock for the next week's clue, so that'll be exciting. The yarn that I'm using is a sock set that I dyed especially for the mystery knit along, and I'm afraid it's not available anymore, but just in case you asked, that was the set that I dyed up, which was inspired by the song I'm Just a Girl. I also did one that was inspired by Bohemian Rhapsody, which was all purples as well, but it was very difficult to decide which one to cast on, and I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to do 2 pairs of socks in the knit along, so I just decided to do this pair. So he suggested using 100 grams of one colour and then 3 different pops of colour. Because I've done these 2 colours are a little bit closer together, it doesn't show up so well on my I-cord, but I still think you can see the striping. But I'm glad that I picked the colours that I did, because it's a sort of a little bit more subtle colour scheme, I suppose, something that I'd wear, although no one's really going to see my feet much anyway. But I'm really excited about seeing what the fit's going to be like with the brioche on the heel flap, and I'm going to make sure that when I pick up stitches around the, well, I don't know if that's the way he's going to do it, but I assume that he's going to pick up stitches around here in some way. It's going to be interesting to see how he's going to do that, and also I'm going to bear in mind that my foot is slightly narrower on my leg, so I'll make sure that I don't pick up too many stitches, but take into account if there's going to be any cables or anything, because obviously they'll take a higher number of stitches if you have got cables in there. He did say about having some sort of spare needle, so I don't know whether that's just to use to hold the stitches on this part, because he said put your stitches on a spare needle, which is interesting, or whether there's some cables in this as well, so that'll be exciting. I love the look of the front, not quite so keen on the I-cord join on the back, might be because I've ended up with a ridge on mine. I'm still excited to carry on, and I'll definitely be finishing these pair of socks for the end of the knit along. how are you getting on with yours? Drop me a message and tell me how you're getting on. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I shall see you next week with a bumper episode with lots of knitting and sewing and all sorts. So see you then. Bye.